so dark. So anyway, good evening. This is, I can't really see anyone either, to be fair, which is probably not a bad thing. This is the first time that I've done a sex lecture. This is a real edge for me to stand here tonight and do this talk. So I just want to name that it feels very vulnerable to do this. And I've got my amazing angels with me tonight, Emily and Chris, who are here to support me through that edge. And I really appreciate all of you being here, and thank you. And I'll crack on. Okay. So my topic, as Ali mentioned, is erotic innocence. And interestingly enough, when I first met Ali around 2016, that was a term that she actually used to describe me. And I'd never heard it before, and I had absolutely no idea what she meant by that. But I was really fascinated to find out about the etymology of the term. So eros, of course, is associated with sexuality and romantic love. But a more encompassing definition that's used in psychology and philosophy is more that eros equates to this brimming life force energy. And the term innocence derives from inner sense, meaning following our own inner guidance, our own intuition. And thus we have the phrase erotic innocence, which I believe is very much our natural state of being. And yet, rare is the human who retains this essence beyond the formative years. Hence perhaps the eternal fascination with Marilyn Monroe, the hybrid incarnation of the goddess and the magical child archetype, who oozed erotic innocence, literally from every pore. Once upon a time, we were all calibrated to this blueprint version of ourselves, the magical child. This sacred era in our lives lasts approximately the first 4 years from when we're born. What characterises the freedom of the magical child years is a complete lack of self-consciousness. And this is why when we were babies, we could literally eye gaze with a total stranger on the bus without acting on the socially conditioned reflex to look away from that which evokes the most fascination and intrigue. This is also why when we were toddlers, we could squeal and wail and scream with full abandon. Eros, life force energy, simply expressed through us, unfiltered. But just as Eve would inevitably bite into the proverbial apple from the tree of knowledge, so too you as a child would eventually look in the mirror and realise, this is me. And just as I can perceive myself, so I can also be perceived by others, and therefore I can also be judged and scrutinised. And so we began to learn how to self-edit in order to shrink and distort ourselves into the compressed, sanitised version which we thought would garner the most external approval and the least criticism. I think of the magical child's raw, unfiltered expression of emotions as somehow kindred to a tropical climate. The default state is glorious sunshine, aka joy, happiness, curiosity, creativity and playfulness. But when the metaphorical tropical storms or rains come, the magical child cries or screams fully until not a droplet of tears is left unshed or rage unspent. And then, within a nanosecond, the glorious sunshine on their face has been restored. The intelligence of the body knows exactly how to bring us back to this state of homeostasis within minutes when we express and release emotions fully on the spot. But we were trained to stop doing this very early on. We were taught to hide our sadness, to repress our outrage, to deny our jealousy, to dissociate from the intensity of our bodily sensations and desires. And over the subsequent years, we forgot how to really feel things much at all. When was the last time you let yourself really desire something? I'm talking about that burning desire that used to swell inside of your body as a magical child, when you desired a new pair of ballet shoes, or a solo singing part in the school concert, or a ticket to go and see the Michael Jackson show at Wembley Stadium. The kind of desire that feels like you're housing a fizzing, popping bottle of champagne inside your own body. When was the last time that you really allowed yourself to feel that? Our capacity to embody the frequency of desire was perfectly intact in those early years, up until we discovered the impact of what I have dubbed the frequency drop. The frequency drop is when the elevated frequencies of desire, excitement, and anticipation that we were so capable of embodying very naturally as children suddenly plummeted to the depths of shame or disappointment in a split second, when we heard and felt the crushing brutality of that two-letter word from our parents: no. The shock of this jarring descent from elation to shame or anticipation to disappointment left a kind of trauma imprint on the nervous system, and so we simply stopped desiring things so intensely, if at all. To begin to allow ourselves to feel our desires so fully again requires us to somehow release the emotional insurance policy of factoring in and even anticipating shame or disappointment in advance in order to mitigate their impact. As I deepened my excavations into the qualities of the magical child archetype, I soon realised that the three pillars of tantra, so spontaneity, exhibitionism, i.e. the desire to be seen and admired, and voyerism, the desire to witness others in their embodied expression, are integral aspects of the magical child archetype. This realisation took me straight back to one of the defining experiences of my life. I was 5 years old, it was 1985, and I had been taken along to the Empire Theatre in Liverpool to watch the annual Christmas panto, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. At the end of the show, the compere announced that there was going to be a laughter competition and that he required 7 children to come up to the stage and take part. I shot out of my chair and literally started scaling the side of the stage like Spider-Man on speed. I was wholeheartedly and spontaneously following the impulse of my desire to claim my rightful space up there in the limelight on that stage, with absolutely no self-consciousness or awareness of what could possibly go wrong. This has to be the very definition of the term erotic innocence. Being the youngest and the smallest contestant, I was the last child to be passed the microphone. It was so large in my hand comparative to my body, and it distorted my voice as I started to speak into it in a way that tickled me, and so I began to giggle. Gradually, to my surprise and delight, I started to become aware of the swelling echo of laughter that started reverberating around the theatre in response to my laughter, like a kind of boomerang of collective hysteria. I was dazzled by the lights and drunk from the feeling of tremendous power that I was the catalyst igniting this spontaneous eruption of life force energy around that theatre. Of course, I was desperate to know when we would be going to the theatre again and when I would get to relive the intoxicating elation of being centre stage that evening. But the matter-of-fact response from my mother was that it was highly unlikely to ever happen again, and I certainly shouldn't expect it. Cue the frequency drop. This makes no sense. I was born for the stage. I was literally the highlight of the show. The audience loved me. Didn't get it. Elation plummeted to biting bewilderment. You may recall a similar defining moment from your childhood, where you somehow severed yourself from your dreams because they just didn't translate to the constraints of the adult world. If I compare and contrast that early experience of being on stage to this current one, the stark difference lies in the total lack of self-consciousness in that early experience of exhibitionism and the acuteness of it now. My 5-year-old self's delight in standing energetically naked and alive in the limelight versus my palpable discomfort with it now. That early experience of stardom was also characterised by a sense of being fully present and responsive to whatever was going to spontaneously unfold. So this element maps directly back onto the tantric aspect of spontaneity. When I don't know what's going to happen, there's room for God, magic, surprise, eros itself to ignite the stage. And herein lies my own personal definition of the hero's journey. I think of it as a devotional mission, if you like, to return as closely as we possibly can to the essence of that magical child blueprint, the original, unbridled self. So how do we pick up our fractured pieces and rewild as much erotic innocence, joy, truthfulness, transparency, courage and spontaneity back into our lives again? And do we dare to tear up that emotional insurance policy, which we all took out so many moons ago, so that we can truly dare to risk living again on the edge of spontaneous possibility and potentiality? I'll leave you with some questions to ponder in order to begin to reconnect more viscerally to your magical child spirit, or what I have dubbed your $1 million essence. Number 1, what truly lit you up as a child, and to what extent are you tending to the remnants of those flames here and now? Number 2, to what extent are you nurturing and exposing your soul gifts so that those who are meant to be graced by them can actually find you? Number 3, to quote Rumi, to what extent are you allowing yourself to be silently drawn by the strange pull of that which you really love? And number 4, to what extent are you willing to begin to take more emotional risks again in order to rediscover the full spectrum of who you really are? Thank you so much, Ali, for inviting me to speak. And yeah, there are some flyers in the foyer about my Magical Child Archetype program for those of you who'd like to know more. Thank you.